Okay, we're going to get started, everyone. ChartHop is thrilled to welcome you all to today's fireside chat, a discussion on a very timely topic, supporting employee growth and wellness at any budget and at every growth stage. The People Ops community is a proud partner of today's webinar. The People Ops community is a free space to connect with People Ops peers, network, and share best practices. You can apply at the link in the chat that I believe our friend Alex, who is a community manager and also hanging out with us today in the chat, will post. There you go. Awesome. So I'd like to invite our panel of forward-thinking people pioneers to give a quick introduction. We'll start with Adrianne and then go in order of these beautiful headshots that are listed here. Thank you all for joining and welcome.
Yes, hi, Adrianne Court here in Plano, Texas. I am with Tealium, a consumer data platform with team members in about 20 countries around the globe and customers around 30. I'm particularly passionate about culture and how you think, act, and connect to your employees, customers, partners, and community.
Hi, my name is Mee. I'm the head of people here at Alt. So we specialize in alternative investments, and I'm excited to be here to talk about wellness and working on a budget.
Good morning, I'm JaNaye Norman. I'm a people leader with 10 years of experience across manufacturing and startups in tech spaces. I think what I'm most passionate about is finding ways to create wellness that have inclusion and mindfulness at its core.
Awesome. And I'm Nyala Khan. I'm excited to be a moderator in today's discussion. I'm very passionate about businesses that are helping us change the way that people teams operate through technology. And let's just dive right in as we talk about our core topics today. So as we focus on the conversation around wellness and supporting employee growth, we know that listening to employees goes a very long way, as well as research, but primarily listening to employees to determine what our needs are for additional support and wellness benefits, and what are the areas that are lacking, what are we doing well at. So, what are some of the formal ways, and I'm opening this question up to either of you, that if formal and informal, that you use to determine how you're going to decide what it is that people need, how are you going to architect the questions, etc. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to start. So, when I think about collecting information about wellness, I think keep it simple. One tool that we use, I'm sure a lot of people are really familiar with, is Culture Amp. And so there's actually a built-in wellness survey, and you can actually, if you aren't investing in Culture Amp, you can find a few of these online free in many different communities. And so, we tend to run a wellness survey alongside engagement surveys. So these are things that we see differently, but really simple to collect some of that information.
Does anyone else want to add on other alternative ways that they capture this information or do the research?
I think there's similarly what Mee shared, certainly through your engagement tools, pulse surveys and things are very important. But then kind of elevating things that we might see in certain countries, areas, or teams, such as increased need for healthcare assistance or reach out for different types of support, certainly all of that. And then just listening to the voice of our team members.
Awesome. So one probing question I'm going to ask you is, what is one of the more powerful questions that has yielded a set of responses that's helpful in terms of directional, actionable next steps?
I think when it comes to working with line managers, I think the biggest thing I always see, especially when it comes to wellness, is what are some of the struggles that you have with team productivity or engagement? And it usually leads to wellness answers like there's too many meetings, my employees are getting burnt out, they're becoming unresponsive. And then when it comes to employees, I think the biggest ones I've seen positive and negative are what are the things that you appreciate most about the company? And then what are some things that are not such a great employee experience right now?
Awesome. Okay, so you all capture this information, you distill it out in a very codified way so that it's digestible. But then what do you feel is, how do you then design, I would say, the opportunities to take those, to take the feedback and the information into an actionable next step that becomes either initiative, or even if it's just a call out, hey, this is what we've learned. What are we going to do next?
I think really the most important element of it is engaging people who really care. So a lot of times we think of everything has to be resting on the shoulders of the HR team, and that's not necessarily the case. So finding people that are passionate about well-being in a variety of things, whether it's physical, mental. We have people throughout our organization that are really into mindfulness. So we'll tap into their or physical well-being or yoga or whatever it is, so they can share how they leverage their well-being with others. One of our core values at Tealium, or our WOWs, is learning incessantly. And we believe in part of learning incessantly is learning about our well-being and taking care of ourselves.
Have any of you all seen something that stands out as a trend through, quarterly or monthly surveys that is tied to well-being, that's showing as an opportunity for improvement?
Yeah, I think recently, right? I mean, we have to acknowledge some sort of what's happening right now with different layoffs and things. I think based on at least our most recent wellness survey, there's been a lot of ask for some sort of stability, right? Either it's, it comes in the form of I'm too stressed out. And I think that there's just more of maybe a pulse on financial stability. And so you can kind of read the undercurrent of what, when somebody says, I'm not well at this level, I think there's a lot of conversation around I need to feel more stable and secure in my job, and things like that. So that is something that I've at least seen as a trend.
Have some of the other panelists seen similar trends? And if so, what have you all done to appease or provide psychological safety around the stability of their roles or the company? Because yeah, you're very right. This is an incredibly important and relevant concern across any type of company, any size and stage, because at this point, it's very clear that everyone's at risk, right? Because the economy is impacting everyone.
Well, you bring up a good point, Nyla. It is a bumpy ride, and it does cause uncertainty. And it's not only the uncertainty for our team members, but within their families. So even though they may not feel the impact at our organizations, their spouses, their partners, their family members, organizations may be going through trying times as well. So we have to think beyond just the individual, but think within their family and their community, the impacts. The one thing I think that's super important is transparency and communications. And I know that's really hard. But if they feel like they can trust you, even if it's going to be bad news, but trust that you're going to communicate that bad news when it's coming is super important. In fact, we went through a small layoff here at the beginning of the year, but one layoff, whether it's 100, is still impactful. We immediately went out and said, we're done. If you do not hear by this time, it's over. There's no more. You're not going to hear anymore, that kind of, so we're able to give people at least a little bit of peace of mind. While we also did that, because we felt it was very important for really setting the sense that we're investing, is we rolled out a global EAP. We call it an ESP because we think it's beyond an EAP since we're in so many countries. And that really set the tone that we get that you're going through this kind of stress. We all are. But here's resources and support for us all. And it's really taken traction even over this short period of time.
I really appreciate you sharing that example. And I love the ESP versus EAP. Support is always more meaningful than assistance. So I just want to open up in case anyone else wants to reply to that. Otherwise, we can keep moving. Anybody other thoughts?
I think in my last role, it was important to mention that, hey, we don't have all the answers right now, but we can work through solutions to find them together. I think employees really appreciated the non-bravado sense of like, hey, we got everything handled. Don't worry about anything. And 2 to 3 weeks later, there's more layoffs. But hey, we don't know what some of those solutions look like right now, but at least we're working to figure out what they could be.
So I have a multi-part question that had come in from one of our audience members or attendees prior to joining today's session. And so I'm just going to read it through, and whoever wants to take a stab, feel free. How do you develop benefits at a mid-sized budget for offices in different countries? What cultural aspects come into play? Very important element. And the goal is to improve benefits. So with that question posed, any thoughts?
Can we get one more readout?
Yeah. How do you develop benefits on a mid-sized budget for offices in different countries? What cultural aspects would come into play as you make your decision?
One of the things I think it's important to is to set minimum standards. Certainly some countries have different standards and higher standards. But at Tealium, for example, we implemented minimum standards so that everybody knows, like I said, like that this is at least the basics. So for example, on maternity leave, we set the global standard, and so people say, but the global standard, we're a mid-sized company of 3 months. No matter what country you're in, that's our minimum standard. Now, some countries have more and some have less, but for us, that's a minimum standard. Same thing, even during our layoffs, we decided we would hit a minimum standard no matter what countries regulated. We would say everyone will get at least this. And then certainly if other countries required more, do others. But those are the ways for us, I think when you start to approach benefits, kind of expressing that is important.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too, I think branding is very important. So when we reflect, when we talk about our benefits programs, our well-being programs, it's all called Helium under the brand Tealium, Helium. Helium is everything around our health and well-being. So we put everything within that umbrella. So people kind of get the connection of the physical and mental well-being relate to our benefits and all the other things that we do.
That's awesome. Thank you, Adrianne. All right, we'll keep it going. So now, we've identified some of the challenges and concerns and researched these areas. You've even proposed, say, a few options and plans. How do you then get buy-in, right? So with a plan to help employees, improve inside or outside of work, what do you do to get buy-in from the executive leadership team? And then furthermore, plan for participation and engagement once you've gotten buy-in and the ability to roll something out. So I guess I'll ask a more directed question. What do you do when you have a limited budget and limited support from leadership, but want support from employees?
I think the biggest thing that I've seen done in sort of like 3 parts is setting that vision. So how are you going to make sure that the program that you're launching, leaders understand how it's positively going to affect the business and what employees are going to get out of it? And what does that return on investment look like? And then from there, posing the solution. I think the biggest one I've done recently is a career framework. So how baseline does everybody at the company understand what it means to be promoted across any job? What do those skills look like? And what are the tools that you can use to access it across the organization? And then from there, the logic behind it, like really showing my work behind, this is the framework, biggest groups, engineering. So if we go from engineering 1 to 4, this is what those steps look like. This is what the tasks that you need to complete. Here are some of the projects that you can work on. And then this is how you'll be evaluated through a performance management process. And then really showing how I address the challenges through employee questions, Q&A sessions, having the VP of engineering talk through how they started from a entry-level engineer to get to where they are and how it fits in the framework we currently have.
That's awesome. I do think being able to tell narratives of success are an important part of the people functions ability to lead and continue motivation across the board, whether it's management or ICs.
I think that's super important. Certainly, I mean, the basics, and sometimes we forget about that, is our engagement scores, our attrition, our referral percentages? Are we using agency? I mean, all those things can relate. So for example, before I joined, we were really dependent on external agency usage, right? And so kind of flipping that and changing that to like, wow, we saved X million, and instead we've increased our employee referrals. Our employer brand, actually what we're expressing externally is reflecting what we're doing internally and vice versa. And it's just so fun. I'm just going to share it in the chat. One of our recruiters just got this note. It says, what appeals most to me about Tealium is the culture. I love the combination of teal plus helium. Like they really got it. And so that this is the stuff that I can go back to the CEO and said, it's paying, it's a return on our investment.
Yeah. And, you know, to add to that, I think one of the parts of the question was, how do you convince your executive team that this is something to invest in? And, you know, it's not that the rest of our executive team don't care about people, is that they have different priorities. And I think like strong people leaders acknowledge that, right? And so a lot of ways, our job as people leaders is to say, look, my job for you is to get you the best candidate that I could possibly get you, make them as efficient as I can, and retain your best talent. And translating what they need from us to our wellness initiatives, right? So, you know, to go back to the original question around like, beyond a survey, how do we really get data that speaks to what our executive team needs? You know, so like on top of the survey, we also pull things like, this is how much time your team takes on PTO. This is the expense that this is the contributions that your team makes on 401ks. And this is what it means if we decrease or increase this budget on that end to your team's efficiency. And so just sort of connecting, you know, our investment, what we see in terms of different data outside of the survey to each individual executive's team, I think has been very powerful for us and doesn't take much convincing at all when they see.
And then me taking it one more step and correlating that to customer retention and customer satisfaction survey results. If you continue to see that improve with the correlation of employee engagement, all this, then you're like a super rock star.
Yeah. Like, and so and I think it's just basically speaking the language of what your other leaders care about, you know, as Adrianne says, like, you know, the head of customer probably cares about the customer stuff, you know, and the product team and things like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point, which is there is a lot of people data that can tell stories across the business and the organization that I think we often forget to connect the dots on or just even get creative around. So if anyone has additional ideas on how they use people engagement or behavior metrics that are measured and be able to translate that to support an initiative, I'd love to hear about that. But if not, we'll keep it moving. It's a tough one. All right. So I do have a direct question, another one. Someone wrote in and said, I'm brand new into a company that my people and culture position is also new to. They are a high-performing, successful, hardworking bunch where 60-hour work weeks and skipped lunches are the norm. What is the best way to get the point across to leadership that work life for many is not balanced?
Well, one thing, let's be thoughtful that maybe that is the culture that has created success for them, and they may not want to change that culture. So that's one first thing as a chief people officer or chief HR officer when you're coming in, you just can't assume that you're just going to like change everything. But if they've brought you in for a reason, right? Maybe they're seeing high attrition, or they're seeing escalating healthcare costs, or they're seeing elevated absenteeism, or they're seeing a difficulty in recruiting people, then you can tie that to, hey, maybe this culture, which has gotten you to this point, is not going to get you to the next point. And so I think that's the best way at approaching it, not just like, hey, 60-hour work weeks and people skipping lunches is not a great idea, but instead tying it back to some of these other things, as I mentioned, attrition, customer sat, maybe deteriorating, loss of great talent, all those kind of things I think is super important to help you in terms of creating that business case to do something.
I actually think Adrianne makes a great point here, which is like, let's have the honest conversation with your leadership team, because what you don't want to do is some performative crap around your wellness, right? It's like, oh man, everybody's working 60 hours a week. Let's like put in no meeting Wednesdays and all this other stuff. And then you realize, oh no, everybody's still having meetings on Wednesdays. And I think that's the dissatisfaction that everybody here has, right? It's like, you wanted us, you tell us you want this thing, we do these programs and nobody adheres to it and everything stays the same. And so I think the most important first step is to have a real talk with your CEO. Like, I'm okay if you say to me, look, this has made us successful. And at some points, I do want to keep this and I do like this culture, but let's really have that dialogue. Don't say to me, no, let's have a lot of wellness and do all this, but we don't adhere. And so, you know, when normally I would hope that the CEO says, I don't want my team to burn out, because burnout is not a very good long-term outcome for the company. And so if that's the case, we like to then start to implement little things like no meeting Wednesdays, where we can hold them accountable. And honestly, your CEO, your C-levels, your leadership team, and yourself as the head of people are the people to hold accountable. You are the driver of this culture. And so as you start to implement no meeting Wednesdays and you're like, hey, you lied. Now we're still like, you know, that meeting on Wednesday is building up again. We can start to go back. And I think it's a constant dialogue. You know, I think like we should stop telling people, let's build this program and it's going to be great. We should actually honestly have the real conversation about what the culture is.
And I think it's about also making it accessible to understand the leadership team and what lens they're seeing everything from. I think it's so easy to say, oh, they have a family, they're used to it, without understanding like this is the lens that they knew that they had to grow the business. So how can we make sure, especially what does it look like to be accessible for them, and explaining how it works out for employees, without missing the point of like, well, they're burnt out right now, but once we get to this series A or series B, to understand why we're doing it, because they'll have more money. Had those conversations before, of really having that, I want to say, come to Jesus moment around like making sure that there's a clear path of this isn't sustainable. So here are some ways that we can really change it.
I do appreciate all your guys' examples, and I do feel like there's a natural responsibility that people leaders have to do the preventative work to define why it's important to retain talent, especially, you know, people who have meaningful institutional knowledge that you want to keep. And I think it's our constant job to continue to defend and define that for our leaders and business across the board. So we're going to kind of pivot into the concept of measuring the impact of some of the programs and initiatives that you all have rolled out. So take a moment, tell me what has been the result of implementing a benefit or support program on your, was one of your goals, you rolled it out. What was successful? How did you measure its success? So think through an example, and would love to hear one that you felt translated from the initial objective to a successful outcome.
Well, I guess I'll start. I kind of touched on this earlier. Joining Tealium a year ago, November, we kind of just laid out some of the things, like I mentioned, like our dependence on agency utilization, our employee referral rate, and then our engagement scores as kind of the three, you know, biggies, and attrition. And so after we kind of outlined some of the programs we're doing well beyond Helium or well-being, we rolled out our Mosaic programs, really begin to articulate our wows, investing in learning. I mean, all these things kind of come together. But for an example, our internal engagement survey score overall improved by more than 10 points. Our well-being program, our mindset around well-being improved by 15 points. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, which also ties very closely to well-being, in my humble opinion, improved by 20 points. And so all those things, and then our agency costs went down and our employee referral percentages went up, our attrition rates began to level off and lower. So those were kind of the key metrics. I know there's some other great ones out there too, but.
JaNaye or me?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to the perspective of something we implemented that we think kind of failed. So like,
That's helpful too.
yeah. So, we implemented, we're alt, so we do alternative investments. You can see like sports cards, things like that. And so one of the things that we found out through our wellness survey was that actually our employees wanted to learn more about investments, which is a really interesting thing for a company that specializes in investing. And so we were like, cool, let's get this. I mean, I'm not going to say the name. I'm like, because it wasn't really their fault, the failure, but like, let's get this financial consulting for like company. That's the benefit. We'll have people sit down. And there's a few metrics that we measure when we kind of bring these folks in, which is sort of like adoption, initial adoption, then usage. And then if the sentiment around like, hey, I understand investments better or less. And then just sort of like overall sort of customer service things when it comes to working with this vendor. And so as we started to adopt them over a year against our budget, we realized this wasn't really working. People weren't using it. People weren't as excited. They really didn't even know what it was. It was just kind of something that got paired into their onboarding. And they were sort of like, I'm not really sure why this is relevant. And we ended up canceling it. And our learnings from that is like, how you roll something out is so freaking important, because like we bought this fancy thing and in the demo to us, it was great, right? It was like, oh, this is going to totally solve all of our issues about people's questions about investments. But when you roll it out without fanfare, when you don't brand it correctly, when you don't tie it to a mission, right? Our mission is to make alternative assets available to people widely. People don't have an understanding of what it does. And then ultimately, there was also a double misdiagnosis of the sentiment, right? People were also worried about, again, stability and their pay. So something like rolling out an investment advisory is not, exactly the right tone either when people are thinking about those. And so it was just provided a really good learning for us in terms of like what not to do next time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. And I personally believe that being on the people team requires like a pseudo marketing degree because everything we roll out has to be packaged, as you guys have mentioned, labeled and championed in a way that you're selling a program, you're selling a concept. Even if people want it, you still have to brand it and package it really, really well, which I know both Adrianne and you guys all have spoken to. Okay, so JaNaye, your initiative or program?
Yep, definitely came from launching initial pulse surveys when we first went remote. And there was such an increase in interest in wellness and resiliency benefits. And what do we do while we're going through COVID? And what does it sort of look like for us? And really working with my team to examine what was causing the burnout. So, I mean, moving the office from being in the office to going remote and still having 20 meetings a day wasn't the best for people. So you're no longer working from home, you're living at work, which created new challenges. And so one of the things I incorporated that really worked out was rest from home days. So it's really about 3-day weekends. It was 3-day weekends once a quarter to really combat that exhaustion and boost out the engagement. And it really helped increase our pulse survey scores. And you could really see a difference in people's mood and them feeling lightened, especially when they came back from those 3-day weekends because they were able to get the rest that they needed instead of having to be on that whole time.
Love that. Any other comments from the team? Thoughts? All right, so we talked about how we sort of had successful outcomes. We referred to some of the metrics. I do have a specific direct question from an audience submission prior to today. What are the most successful metrics in creating a healthy work environment with and without a budget? So let's contextualize this question a little bit just to help you answer, because it's fairly vague. So let's say you had to, establish a quarterly goal for the people team that's revolving around healthy work environment. What would that metric be? And then, how would you measure it with or without a budget?
I think really fundamentally at the end of the day, a healthy working environment is one where people feel they can voice their opinion without fear of retaliation. And that's actually one of our highest scores at Tealium. but we work a lot on that. So we spend a lot of time with leaders and training and but we also have to know that with employees, just because you voice an opinion doesn't mean that we're going to accept that, or that means the world's going to change. But certainly that we listen and learn from, varying perspectives and opinions.
I love that answer. I think it's important to recognize that your health is not just physical, it's very much mental. And we all spend hours of our day, so much of our lives at our work, that the psychological safety element is very important too. Any other thoughts on that or ideas?
Yep. And I think using it in terms of performance management and performance development scores, because I think we forget culture is about who we hire, promote, and fire. And sometimes it gets lost in translation from, oh, this person's a really good performer, but they're not good with people. And it really doesn't translate until you're doing 360 feedback forms to really see where are some issues that we're having and what can we do to correct those, to really make sure people can feel safe in voicing those opinions and knowing something's going to get done outside of just sweeping the problem under the rug.
Okay. Me, do you have any thoughts, or we can move on?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to like metrics for a healthy work environment, I do think that there's multiple metrics that measure that. I would say, to echo both Adrianne and JaNaye, I think wins are really important to track for people, like your own individual wins and wins as a company. One of the things that I think it's really important to discuss is wellness programs, initiatives. If the company is not winning or not being perceived to be winning in some ways, right? Either from the people front, from the product front, from the market front, it doesn't matter what you design, right? And it's so important then to point to like those things that show that a company itself is healthy and is winning. So that's my thought.
I love it. Yeah, I think the love languages concept does have a segment that's called words of affirmation. And speaking to what May is saying, that is very relevant. I think it applies. Like, we have to continue celebrating, championing, and telling everyone in a very public way, whether it's a quarterly business review on what your team has done, whether it's on talent acquisition or people ops, and regurgitating that back to the org is another way to provide that validation and summarize the winnings. Cool. Okay, I have one more direct question. What do you recommend for operationalizing employer investment in employee care? For example, what about adding whether or not an employee used all of their non-rolloverable PTO during a year as a part of their annual evaluation to rate if they're taking time to take care of themselves? Why or why not? So I think this person is saying putting the responsibility back on the individual to care for themselves as a part of the measuring process. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you have to be a little bit careful about that, only because like sometimes the individual can't help the environment that they are in. But I am coming from a place where I have done that with my own leaders, right? So I say, like, I am going to measure you on your ability to take PTO, because if you can't take PTO, then I'm not convinced that you will allow your team to as well. And so I see this as a reflection of your ability to mimic for your team the behaviors that I would like to see. And so that, I think, like, if you put that on a people manager, on a leader, I think that makes sense. To put it on like maybe sort of an individual contributor, I think might be a little bit tough.
Yep, I learned a lot on my manager reviews, specifically around the burnout. That was the one area I was unclear on until I had the survey come back up to me. So I appreciate that. Any other perspective or thoughts?
I mean, I think she really spoke to it about the level of accountability, because if you do put it on the employee, it may lead them to feeling unsafe to where they are taking a vacation, but they're still working, or my boss emailed me, I have to respond to this, without having that accountability from the manager of say, hey, if this person's on PTO, I think this email or Slack message can wait.
Yeah. Agree there. Okay. So any other final thoughts before we move into the Q&A from the audience? We have a few questions that have come in. Okay. So first is, this is from Mark. What does that feedback loop look like in your respective orgs? Bubbling up intense pain from the bottom to the top. I feel like Adrianne wants to say something.
I'm not sure, like, I understand the question, but
I'm interpreting it as they are curious how you take the initial feedback and bubble it up to the top. And that's my simplest understanding. So I'm gonna go with that.
I mean, it's not that difficult if you're doing surveys or pulse surveys. It's pretty like clear, particularly if you have high, percentage participation. So, I think it's important, the way I kind of put it, and maybe I'm old school, when I think about the role as the CHRO or Chief People Officer or whatever, title we want to give ourselves, working with the CEO or the executives, they're the head, but you're the neck. So you have to figure out a way how you move the head, and you have to kind of put yourself in their mindset. So like, if you've got a CEO that's very numbers driven, results driven, then you have to think about doing things that, are non-emotional, that these are the results. This is what your team's saying. This is what it means. Or you might have others that are a little bit more on the, they want the texture around it. What did the comments say that validate that? I think those are the most important things. And then as you see these numbers shift, up is great, but as they kind of shift down, it's super important. The other thing too that I forgot to mention is Glassdoor. I think it's like a frenemy kind of situation we have with Glassdoor, because it's extremes. But the one thing that I think is important about Glassdoor is, are you starting to see themes that are consistent with what you're seeing internally on your surveys? I always like to triangulate that. And then that's also great evidence to your CEO as well, or your executive team as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add that if you don't have a paid, survey tool subscription, you can always do a Google anonymous box form. It's like the low, no budget friendly way to do that, assuming you have some sort of Google Suite access. But there are ways to kind of create feedback loop and provide the anonymity that's sometimes necessary or required to avoid the one-on-one conversations. Any other thoughts, or we'll move on to the next question. All right, so curious to hear about y'all's experience in caring for yourself as a people ops leader, specifically in a culture that isn't currently prioritizing employee wellness. How have you maintained some boundaries between the work you do and how you care for yourself?
I'm all in on that. So by the way, I'm probably oldest by far on this call, and who knows, but yeah, I'm going to say, so I'm going to be 56 in March. And taking care of your physical well-being is always important. It becomes uberly important, like once you hit that 50 threshold. And I mean it. And so two things that I do, and I lead by example, and I talk about it, is I walk 5 to 7 miles a day, period, end of story. It does not matter. Hell, high water, rain, shine, snow, sleet, I'm doing it. And I think I lead by example to everyone about that. And that means sometimes, some days I just don't start work until 9:30 or 10 because I've got to get my walk in. I worked late the night before, so guess what? I'm getting my walk in this morning. I might do a few slacks, I might do a few things, but I'm doing it. And I think that's super, super important, particularly as we get older. I'm not saying that, but you have to do that. Also healthy eating. So we talk about healthy eating all the time. Today we got a whole bunch of people in the office. I'm normally not in the office because I do work remotely. But like, hey, where's the healthy choices? Like we need to make sure. In fact, let's overly rotate on the healthy choices so that we're grabbing, the apple or the orange instead of the candy bars. So there you have it on that.
Plus on the employee health.
I think one of the things I do, and I make it known as soon as I start an organization or I'm there for a while, is I have blocks on my personal and work calendar. So people know I'm going to the gym. I go to the gym every day. at 6 a.m. So it's either yoga, I'm doing CrossFit, and then I have snack times and lunch times on my calendar. So people know I'm stepping away from my desk. Like you can still email me or Slack me, but I'm going to grab something. I need to get up. I need to be away from the computer screen. And I've had employees tell me that makes a difference for them, because if they see me doing something, they know it's okay for them to do it outside of, oh, she's working 8 hours a day and she hasn't moved in 6.
I love that. Yeah. Being in a healthcare background, we often put our therapy appointments on our calendars as well to destigmatize and promote and leading by example. Let's go, Mew. What you got for me?
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of what JaNaye was saying, I do think we need to model sort of the behaviors that we want. And we're a fully remote company. And so the reality of being fully remote is like, you're not always getting dressed up, right? Sometimes you're watching TV while you're working, and there are different things that happen, right? And the boundaries between your personal life and your work life gets blurry. And so, you know, one thing that I do is sometimes I'm not always combing my hair, right? I'm dressed for work in my Snuggie or something, and it's okay. I run my meetings in my Snuggie. Sometimes there's a Netflix background in the back, and my team is like, what are you watching today? And it's really to normalize that it's like, you are working at home now. You do need breaks. You do have a way to work which makes you comfortable. And, you know, if you're not customer facing and you're not candidate facing, we accept the way you want to show up to work, right? If you want to show up, you know, in a suit, we accept these things. If you want to show up with snacks and your Snuggie, that's cool too. And then our leadership team, actually, I think there's one person that's really good at basically slacking the general slack and saying, guys, I'm feeling really burnt out for the next 3 days. I'm going to take some time off. And I encourage you to as well when you hit this wall. And I think just sort of like showing people that you're human with human things. And so, yes, Snuggie meeting Mondays is what Danielle Dorder is saying we should do, and I approve.
That or adding nap times to the calendar, because sometimes at 2:30, 3 o'clock, I'm done. I'll take a quick power nap and I'll come back and be ready for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I used to do that in the office. I would literally put my head down for 10 minutes and I would just magically wake up. I do think I want to point out, you guys have all spoken to a theme that I think is important, specifically me, which is our increased awareness and responsibility to evoking belonging at a business has changed what we define as professionalism. And I think that word is very archaic. It's very to each its own, and for us to be in a place and a time where we can define what works is really about belonging and not being some word that represents something somebody somewhere at one point thought was right, is a nice thing that we've evolved to, but also speaks to the idea of showing up in your Snuggie or taking a snack break. And I did see something on my CEO's calendar recently that just warmed my heart. She has a very large block one of these days that says mommy time. And I was just so taken aback by that as a mom, and I'm very empowered by that. So I do think leading by example is super, super impactful, even for us. All right, so any other thoughts before I jump on to the next question? Okay.
I did have a CEO who would put on his calendar every afternoon that when he was helping his kids with homework and they were doing dinner time, and it said do not disturb, because that was important to him, and everybody knew not to bother him during that time. And I think it sort of trickled down to the rest of the organization.
Yeah. All right. So question in the Q&A today. What are your thoughts on unlimited PTO and anything we should be aware of before implementing such a program?
Well,
I feel like there's a lot of hot takes on this one.
Yes. I'll have to say, I was probably like a leader in the way of that unlimited PTO like 20 plus years ago. And there are wonderful advantages to it because it does give you freedom to think like, if I just need to take the time, I'll take the time. But there are studies that people are not taking as much. Also, it can be very complex and complicated because if you are operating in other countries and certain states, it's not possible. It's just illegal in some areas to just do unlimited PTO. It's interesting though, from a candidate perspective, when we are, people are interviewing with us, they want unlimited PTO. They're asking for it, you know? And then when you kind of look at the analysis, people only taking 2 weeks versus had they had the 3 or 4, they might have taken more. So I think the jury's out on that. I think really kind of going back to some of this other stuff, like taking time off when you need, or if you have, if you have like doctor's appointments or whatever in the middle of the day, certainly depends on the job, right? If you're a customer service person and you need to be available, that's one thing, but really it should be a results-driven organization, right? Like what your results are. It doesn't matter how many hours I'm staring at the screen or how fast I respond to on Slack, but it's really the results that you're contributing. And that's the mindset. I think it's important for us as CHROs to help lead the way with our executives and leaders. Is it's about results, man. It's not about the hours that you're spent on Zoom or in the office. But that's been a conversation well before COVID, and a lot of us going to remote and hybrid and all those discussions too.
Yeah, my thinking is when people say they want unlimited PTO, they're actually asking for like a level of flexibility, right? They just want to know, like, if I want to take a 3-week vacation versus a 2-week, if I need like to take some time off to go to an appointment, can I just have that flexibility? And so like, I think the science already did tell us people aren't taking PTO when you call it unlimited. And quite frankly, it's sometimes a way for companies to not pay that accrual that they owe people when people leave. So it can be quite icky. So if you're going to do something like that, you should brand it correctly, call it flexible PTO. You should give recommendations, in my opinion, around like what you think the minimum is appropriate and what you expect people to take, and sort of like set some structure around it. Hey, you still need approval from your manager. We would like you to take, no more than 2 to 3 weeks at a time, things like that. And so in that way, you can really structure it how you want. Just don't call it unlimited, because that's untrue. There's no such thing. No, I can't sign up for a job and be like, I'm taking unlimited. I'll see you guys in 6 months.
Yeah, you have to put frameworks around it for sure.
It's kind of like selling something that's mislabeled. all back to marketing. All right, JaNaye, do you have any thoughts on unlimited PTO that you'd like to share?
I mean, I think I agree with them as well. It's just making sure you have minimums and making sure that it is modeled throughout the organization for people to be able to take time. I think the biggest way I've seen discretionary time off used is around bereavement leave, and having a bigger definition of what it means to have it for employees and what they need depending on who they need to take it for, with some of the ways that we saw it used. And then making sure that even if it is abused, people understand the consequences around it. Like, you can't take 8 weeks off in the middle of the busy season and then come back and expect everything to be okay.
Okay, all right.
We do a, which I know a lot of companies do, but we do a, we call it our helium break in July. So we do an all company shutdown, other than a small skeleton crew, and we notify our customers and all of that ahead of time. And we do feel like that's a time, because, even when you do take time off, we all know stuff gets built up in your emails, your Slacks, whatever. Even if you tell everybody and you say it's out of office, it's just that nagging feeling. So implementing, if it's possible, that kind of break where everybody's shut down, and our CEO leads the way, like, hello guys, unless something's truly on fire, we're out.
Tell me.
Adrianne, do you do that for all of July?
No. We just do it July 4th week.
Oh, nice. I was gonna say all of July. Let me know if you're hiring.
Yeah, the
We
whole
did it-
all
when we
the
first
audience
did it-
members are like applying to your career
Yeah.
site right now.
we first did it like Thanksgiving week, but then again, we're global. That July, middle of July tends to work for everybody based on holidays and time and everything. So we kind of landed on that.
And we do similar things. We do wellness days. So we pair wellness days to a longer weekends. Let's say we take like Thanksgiving off. We'll give people Thursday as a wellness day and then call it Friday they take
Right, right, yeah.
and then
That's
we like to do it. We give people a month's warning because the surprise delight factor is always great.
Oh, that's fun, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes they can't plan their vacations, but then they're like, oh, like cool, like I just got a day off. Like, the people team just announced a day off.
Yeah, yeah, that's fun.
All right, so we'll move on to another question that we have. It speaks a little bit to some of the conversations we've had previously, but how do you more granularly measure motivation on the organizational level? I find that to be a very tough question, so I take pause.
How do you measure motivation?
There's a specific question that I used to ask that in a survey that said, do you feel the impact of not meeting your goals? And that's one way to kind of understand if people are motivated.
I think like a good question here is, why do you feel the need to measure motivation? Or like, why is this the metric? Because I think that is like, because I think you're trying to measure something else, right? And sometimes when I hear this, it's almost like somebody's not performing and or like, I don't feel like a whole group is performing or something's going on. And so I wonder if like, sometimes it's the right question, you know what I mean? To like anchor on that. But I do like the question that you asked, which is like, how do you feel about not hitting your goals? But I almost feel like that speaks to somebody's sense of self a little bit more than maybe like whether or not they're motivated. So interesting.
Yeah, we used to apply it to how the leader of said team is contextualizing and championing the attainment of goals as part of the measure. Because ideally, if most companies have OKRs, you want people to care about them meaningfully. But I was just one way. So we'll jump into the second question. I'm going to break this question up a little bit, Zoe. The way I'm going to ask it is, what are 1 to 2 steps to engage a group of execs where you don't fit in and get buy-in where real change is needed? So I think the part that I've experienced, and I'm sure speaks to each of us in some point of our career, which is like the don't fit in piece, which is challenging. And it's especially as you're building yourself as a people leader. This is something I think we've all had to experience. So I'd love each of you to share your thought on, or any one of you, it's not mandatory that each of you share, but what are 1 to 2 steps to engage a group of execs where you don't fit in and you need to get buy-in where real change is needed?
Where you don't fit in?
I think if I can step in, I think opposite is I'm usually the youngest one on the leadership team. I just turned 30 in November. So it's very hard to say,
Oh, I remember those days.
Yeah, see, Adrianne, maybe this question doesn't relate. It's like earlier in your career.
I remember those days. Those have long gone. Yeah. Now I'm like the oldest one in the room.
So it's usually the opposite of a conversation of, oh, you remind me of my daughter. And I'm like, well, okay, well, I'm sitting on the leadership team. So one thing I like to do is I like to come in and learn and explore. So I like to meet with each of those leaders so I can find a common ground of how do we want to work together? How do we want to meet? How often should we meet? What's the decision-making process? Like, what do you expect from me in a people ops leadership position? And what I expect from you, and just setting those base level boundaries, and then what good people ops looks like to them versus what it looks like to me, and really understand what are some of those must-haves that they have or what they have around their understanding around people ops or even human resources. I mean, I think people have all had a good and bad experience. So making sure I understand base level and boundaries to build a relationship for there has really worked out for me.
I wish that I could catch every people leader in their first time going into the role to tell them like things like, if you don't feel like you fit in, that's really important to listen to, right? It's sort of like, how does that translate, that feeling of not fitting in? Do you not feel like you're heard? Do you not feel like they care about your function. And these are things to really test at the interview stage of like, look, I have these opinions. I'm going to be really direct with you about how I would see the people function. I need this alignment. Now, let's say you're already in there and you're like, look, I don't really feel like I fit in with this function, this executive team. I think that's important to hear and to choose for yourself. But ultimately, I do think that at the end of the day, each executive, whether or not you fit in, they want to know what's the benefit to their organization to adopt what you want them to adopt. And so being able to tie their business goals and what they need to do and to basically help them out in those things, I think will make a huge difference on whether or not you are an effective leader. So the question about fitting in, I almost feel like it may be also a secondary question about my effectiveness. And I think that those are really things to really explore. And sorry, I cursed. Don't work somewhere where you don't feel valued, right? And so that would be my biggest advice.
Look at you correcting your quote unquote bad word.
Yeah, I knew this was going to happen.
It's not, I don't think you need to correct or that's you. We're so close to running out of time, and I wanted to just wrap up with, I think this is a ChartHop thematic question, as I remember being asked this. So I'm going to ask each of you, and this is how we'll wrap up today's session. And thank you so much to the audience and of course the moderators. But what do you want, or what legacy do you want to leave behind?
At our current organizations or in our career?
You can answer in whatever context. I think it's probably better said separating yourself from the orgs, right? Just like as a leader, as a people leader, what legacy would you want to leave behind?
For me, my passion is around culture and specifically how you think, act, and connect. And for me, leaving a legacy of change around culture beyond the walls of the organizations I've worked for, but within the communities I've worked is pretty rockin' awesome.
Awesome. JaNaye?
I think I want to be remembered. So a long way in my career to be a leader that curates inclusive experiences that allow freedom and space, where employees recognize that they are valued for their unique differences that they bring to the organization, rather than reinforcing those gaps that keep them separate.
I love that. And me?
Yeah, so one of the things that gives me the most pleasure is to open doors for people that wouldn't have had access to like some of the spaces that I've been really fortunate enough to access. And so as I like start to hire different people and I see them get their first tech job, get raises, make a lot more money than they thought they ever could, those are things that really bring me a lot of pleasure. So my legacy is, to see people who would have otherwise had these opportunities, like get to thrive and get their foot in the door.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you. Thank you all so much. We hope that the audience found this as helpful and impactful and fun as we did. And we'll wrap.